excited to be talking to all of you, but I have to admit, I have spent most of my time since the campaign laying on my couch, eating pasta and just kind of recovering from the craziness that was the campaign. So you'll have to excuse me if I stumble a little bit, and I'm going to be using some notes here to keep me on track as I my drug policy brain. So it's good to see some familiar names, and I really appreciate you all for being here. If you don't know me, my name is Sheri Eckert. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And in a former life, I was the political outreach director for Measure 109. Our goal was to create a licensing and regulatory framework to serve those who seek psilocybin therapy, who can safely benefit from it, whether or not they have been diagnosed with a mental illness. Oregonians overwhelmingly supported this with a stunning 10% plus margin. For context, 15 out of 32 counties voted in support of this, but by contrast, only 4 out of 32 supported cannabis legalization. So clearly Oregonians see the need for more avenues of access to care, and we really struck a nerve in fighting for this campaign. So thank you to those familiar names, and if you're somebody who supported this campaign, whether it was voting for it, thank you from the bottom of my heart. We really, we made history in so many different ways by running this campaign. So I'm going to go through some basics about the campaign. And for those of you who are familiar with the campaign, you've probably heard me give this spiel before, and it'll just be a refresher. But it's important to know. I joined the campaign about a year ago when it was just Sam Chapman and myself, just the two of us. And at the start of the campaign, he and I had been looking at statistics from the CDC, which showed that 1 in 5 Americans were suffering from symptoms of clinical anxiety or depression. But in the ensuing months, with the pandemic and the economic downturn, that number has skyrocketed. Now more than 1 in 3 Americans is experiencing those symptoms. And Oregon is, of course, not immune to this. And according to studies aggregated by the CDC, Oregon's mental health crisis is the most acute in the nation. And rigorous studies at leading medical institutions such as Johns Hopkins, UCLA, Oxford, Harvard, even the VA have shown that psilocybin therapy works, and that it's uniquely effective in treating symptoms of anxiety and depression, end-of-life anxiety, and even addiction. It has shown so much progress and promise that the FDA has granted it breakthrough therapy status twice, meaning that psilocybin-assisted therapy can demonstrate substantial improvement above and beyond what is currently available. It's not addictive, it's not toxic, and it can be so effective. So this is, that's kind of the history, and that's the landscape in which Tom and Sheri Eckert designed the measure. It took them more than 5 years of tireless work to bring this carefully crafted measure to the people. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge Sheri's work and her passing. She passed shortly before Christmas, just a few weeks after seeing her life work complete. And although I know thousands of individuals will know her love through the passage of this measure and access through this life-changing treatment, as women in plant medicine, we're standing on her shoulders every minute that we do this work. She is greatly missed. I miss her. And I just want to observe a moment of silence. And if you have a warm memory or a thought about Sheri to share in the comments, that would be really welcome. Thank you. And thank you to Sheri, really. I would not be here without her, and none of us would be. So talking about our path to victory, we ran a really small but a really scrappy campaign. There were only 4 paid staff members. So we had to build a really strong grassroots campaign of advocates and communicate 4 basic points quickly and clearly to voters, which were, and everyone who's worked on the campaign will know this, what is psilocybin, right? Not everyone even knows. What does the research say, talking about those studies from those leading institutions? What does the measure do and not do? And who stands to benefit from having access to psilocybin therapy? So our campaign went fully remote, gosh, I think a year ago to the day, actually, when the first regional stay-at-home orders were issued, and we remained fully remote for the duration of the campaign for the safety of our community. This was a scary time for our campaign. March is normally when petitions really crank up to top gear to get signatures in, because you have to turn in 112,020 signatures to the Oregon Secretary of State to qualify for the ballot. But when we went remote, we didn't have that many at all. And here in Oregon, those signatures have to be what's called a wet signature, where it's the physically signed sheet. You can't fax it in, you can't email it in. It has to be the signed sheet, which is why you're always getting accosted by nice people with clipboards on the street in the spring of election years here in Oregon. There's a reason for that, right? So thank you to the people in the chat who I know helped us with this. We were lucky that we started gathering signatures early, and we were so well supported. This requirement unfortunately killed many citizens' initiatives here in Oregon that hope to become ballot measures alongside us this year. I think there was something like 63 initiative petitions that were hoping to become ballot measures, and only 4 became measures. And the last 35,000 signatures that we gathered remotely. So again, I cannot thank those of you in the chat who pitched in on this phase of the campaign, or even if you're just someone who sent in their signature by mail, thank you. Again, only 4 statewide ballot measures making it to the ballot is pretty rare. So, I mean, Measure 109 made history in so many ways in just overcoming that hurdle. And overcoming that hurdle essentially meant that we effectively had to throw out the rule book and rethink everything we thought we knew about campaigning. I mean, getting 112,020 Oregonians to sign a petition is one thing, in a pandemic, no less. But getting 1.2 million to vote for your measure is another. And we knew from our petition drive that not everyone knows what psilocybin is or what psilocybin therapy is, much less how it can help them and help those that they love. So that's when we brought in Anne-Marie Backstrom. Many of you also know her. We brought her in to be our education director because we knew that education would be key to winning. And Anne-Marie really brought us over the finish line by helping us educate Oregon voters. Oregon already has the highest prevalence of mental illness of any state, and preliminary data indicated that COVID-19 was just exacerbating this issue, both locally and nationwide. So as a campaign, it was central to our mission to center communities that were already being disadvantaged and were going to be most disadvantaged by racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic healthcare practices that are inherent to an existing system. So only by centering those voices and educating the public, we managed to run a campaign that was really aligned with our values and with values that we want the psilocybin industry to continue to champion. So let's talk about some of the details of the measure. We're entering this 2-year rulemaking period where a lot of details are going to shake out, but some things were written into the legislation. So under Measure 109, Oregonians over the age of 21 will have access to supervised psilocybin therapy, provided that they can pass a preliminary screening for contraindications and complete a health and safety assessment. So just like so many other available therapies we have now, a diagnosis will not be required. So if people think that treatment can help and their screening shows no potentially risky contraindications, they can consider it as an option. So some of those details which are under the measure is, so under Measure 109, it established a regulatory framework under the Oregon Health Authority, which already administers many of our healthcare licenses now. It's established the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, probably being appointed by the governor as we speak. It requires a training and licensure system for therapy facilitators and psilocybin manufacturers and testing laboratories. There will be licensing limits to prevent corporate takeovers. So an entity can only hold 5 licenses for facilities and only 1 for a grow op. That was written in after some, unfortunate lessons that we had to learn when cannabis was legalized. It also imposed this 2-year development period, which we just entered, before licenses can be granted. So it started this January, but no doors will open until January of 2023. And the measure is not expected to directly cost taxpayers because it calls for psilocybin to be taxed to pay for the regulatory program at a rate which is tax neutral. So that's what the measure is going to do. But sometimes I think more importantly is knowing what the measure will not do. The measure will not allow for retail sales, right? So you're not going to see psilocybin dispensaries. You won't see any off-site consumption, unregulated production, inventory, and delivery will remain illegal. So it's not legalization for personal possession of psilocybin, and that's something that's really important to hammer home. And when you're talking to other interested advocates in the community, that's definitely something we want you to communicate. Also, it doesn't permit for branding of psilocybin products. So you won't be driving down I-5 and see like a mushroom billboard. It might permit psilocybin services to be advertised, but what exactly that is going to look like is one of those details that is going to shake out during this 2-year rulemaking period. And then, of course, like I said, it will only be available to individuals over the age of 21. So there will be no access to minors, and facilities are going to have to exist, a distance away from like schools, etc. I often get asked what this will look like in practicality. So under Measure 109, it's a 3-step modality, and the first step is a preparation session. So you go, you meet with your facilitator, informed consent and a health and safety warning will happen during the session. You'll do that standardized risk assessment with a contraindication screening. What exactly that is going to look like is one of those things that the OHA is going to determine during the next 2 years. And essentially, this first meeting is a mental health review and a goodness of fit assessment. The second step is the psilocybin session, right? So you'll go back, you'll meet with the same facilitator. This must occur at the licensed facility with that licensed facilitator only. The facilitator must be present throughout the entire process, and the facilitator must certify completion, and afterwards, hopefully someone who loves you and cares about you will take you home. And then afterwards, that third step is going to be an integration session. This must be offered by the facilitator. You don't have to attend, but they have to offer it. And essentially, that's where you can go back, you can talk about what you experienced, what you learned, and how you want to roll that into your own wellness. So in practicality, that 1, 2, 3 modality is going to essentially shape what psilocybin services look like under Measure 109. Now that we've entered this 2-year rulemaking period, we have a little bit of a timeline that is shaking out, and I've gotten a lot of questions about that, so I want to talk about that. And first is that starting in February, the governor is appointing that advisory board. And written into the measure, there are many reserved spots, which I think people are very curious about. So I'm going to rattle off a big list of what these reserved spots look like. One is for a local health officer. One is for a representative of a federally recognized Indian tribe. One is for a member of the OHA Addictions and Mental Health Planning and Advisory Council. One is for the member of the OHA Health Equity Policy Committee. One is for a palliative care professional. One is reserved for an individual who represents individuals who provide public health services. One is for a licensed psychologist, one for a licensed physician, one for a licensed naturopath. One is for an expert in the field of public health who has a background in academia. One is for a person who has professional experience conducting scientific research regarding the use of psilocybin, regarding the use of psychedelic compounds in clinical therapy. One is for a mycology expert. One is for an ethnobotany expert, and one is for a person who has experience in the field of psychopharmacology. And then there's going to be a few other spots, one for a person who has experience in the field of psilocybin harm reduction, one is for a representative from the OLCC, one is for a person representing the Department of Justice, and then Tom Eckert, one of the chief petitioners, is also going to sit on this board. So these are the professionals who are going to be accumulating all of the most recent research and really determining what the details are going to be once doors start opening and licenses start getting granted in 2023. So that's the first step in this timeline. By July of this year, July of 2021, the OHA is supposed to publish aggregated psilocybin research that this board has put together. And then June of next year, June 2022, the advisory board will publish recommendations about the rules and regulations. And then in January of 2023, finally, the OHA can start granting licenses that have been applied to. So that's kind of what this 2-year rulemaking period looks like. There's a lot of details that were written into the legislation, but there's still a lot that are going to be determined during the next 2 years. So keep an eye on that timeline. And it's, I don't know, it's going to be really exciting to see what happens during the next 2 years. If you have questions, definitely drop them in the chat. I'm trying to get all this info out with enough time to chat about it. So I don't know. Ultimately, Oregon has always carried the torch for groundbreaking public healthcare access policies like this, and it's really, really exciting. But another issue that I wanted to touch on briefly is decriminalization. Just because people always want to conflate decriminalization with legalization and the legal therapy model with broad legalization. So let's talk about it. In 1973, I think it was, Oregon was the very first state to decriminalize cannabis use. So it was no surprise to me that we were the first state to reclassify personal possession of most substances under Measure 110 this last November. I'm super honored that our team got to work alongside them. But since I often see decriminalization conflated with legalization, it's worth knowing that it is not the same. And under Measure 110, you will only be given a ticket and like a small fine and some classes rather than jail time. But this does not mean personal use or possession of psilocybin is permitted under Oregon law. It is a huge step in the right direction, but this is another one of those topics where when you're talking to your friends, I want to make sure that you carry that information forward. But ultimately, like, it's this kind of progressive thinking that really makes me proud to be an Oregonian. And it's only thanks to advocates like Samantha and Lisa here at Tokeativity that Measure 109 and 110 passed. They put all of their networking might into helping us educate and do outreach. So I'm hoping that if you take anything away from this talk, it's that you continue to help us do that education and outreach with your friends. Ultimately, no progress is perfect. And right now, especially, it's going to be up to us to continue to fight and make sure that we're doing good work to destigmatize this powerful substance and to continue to fight for access, equity, and inclusion in all systems surrounding this new psychedelic renaissance. Because, you know, it's coming into a world that's already fraught with inequities and injustices that we need to tackle. But I don't think that fighting for healing or justice is too radical. And I know from running this campaign that I am not alone. So if you want to stay involved, I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat. The first one here is the page with the OHA, where you can go and sign up for their newsletter so you can hear what's happening with legislation straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. the OHA does send out, I think it's weekly newsletters about what's happening. So that's going to be a great place for you to just hear exactly what's happening straight from the Oregon government. The second link I am dropping here in the chat is for the Healing Advocacy Fund. So the Healing Advocacy Fund is, it's essentially an extension of the Measure 109 campaign. So if you followed us on Facebook or Instagram at the Vote Yes on 109 tag, that has changed to Healing Advocacy Fund. It's a new nonprofit, and they're working with experts and researchers and advocates to help design this therapy program. And over the next 2 years, as the Psilocybin Advisory Board and the OHA are establishing regulations, the Healing Advocacy Fund is also going to be on the front line. And our very, very beloved campaign manager, Sam Chapman, is the executive director. So this is a great resource. He's obviously the most knowledgeable person about what Measure 109 is, was, has been, will be. So you can sign up for an email newsletter from that resource as well. So I think those are probably going to be the best places for you to stay involved and educated as advocates. And yeah, I don't know, I guess in closing, I just want to say that whether or not you agree with Measure 109, if you're pissed about it, if you're happy about it, if you're in this room, you care about psilocybin and psilocybin therapy. So get active, get politically active, stay involved, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. This was not a law that was cooked up in Salem by politicians. This was a citizens' initiative that was started by a couple who saw a place for change and healing, and voters agreed with them. A lot of voters agreed with them. So this campaign was only made possible because there were tireless advocates who clocked hours of hard work week after week after week to make it happen. So if I can say anything in closing, it's just to practice corporeal politics. It's not enough to just hit like and share. If you get out there and you actually do the hard work and you're willing to talk to people and you're willing to have those hard conversations, really anything is possible. Yeah, and just thank you to everyone in the room who I know helped us. Thank you to everyone who voted for it. I'm going to check the chat now, so excuse me while I scroll through. I'm sure that there are a few questions. And if you have any thoughts or questions before I clock off, just let me know. Just let me know. Let's see. Oh, Regina, hi. It's so good to see you. Yeah, Nakia, you're right. Decriminalization is not the same as legalization. And when we talk about psilocybin being legalized, it's not the same as legalization in a broad sense here. Like, you often see it reported somewhat incorrectly, even by some of our best friends, where, you know, sure, it's legalized, but only in a therapeutic aspect. And I just want to make sure that everyone who hears this talk and who talks to their own people knows that it's only going to be in that licensed facility with a licensed facilitator only. And personal possession, although it is has been reclassified, it is not the same as what most people think of when they think of decriminalization or legalization. So I just always want everyone to be safe and know their rights and be informed. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm going to hang out for a couple of minutes and take a drink of my tea. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to everyone who helped us get here, because I definitely recognize several names here. Thanks, Allison. So good to see your name. I wish I could see your face. I hope you've been well. You did a lot of good, hard work for us. And yeah, again, the Healing Advocacy Fund is is run by Sam. And so it's essentially just an extension of Measure 109 right now. So besides hearing straight from the OHA, making sure that you're on the Healing Advocacy Fund list is also probably the best way to just stay on top of everything that's happening. You know, if you were a part of the campaign, you know, Sam was so relentless, and he remains so, still doing all the hard work. Hi, Regina. I'm sorry. Sam is the busiest little kitty in the world right now. I don't have any say over what is happening on picking that advisory board. Kate Brown is going to be selecting those individuals directly. But you know, I definitely would follow up with Sam. I know that he's getting a lot of email traffic, and it's not just from Oregonians, it's from people outside of Oregon who want to know how they can replicate the same thing that's happening here. So just you know, don't be afraid to like email him again and be like, hey, don't forget about me. He's really busy. I think the fund right now was just maybe 2 or 3 employees. So you can only imagine how busy they are and how much email traffic they probably get. But thank you so much for showing up and making all those calls. I know that hearing from a pharmacist was a really powerful message for a lot of voters. So I don't know, I haven't forgotten a single person who did all that hard work for us. Also, I think I'm supposed to have a meeting with Sam, and I don't think he's gotten back to me on that either, so don't feel like you're alone. Okay, I just have a few minutes here left on my time slot. So I'm just gonna keep hanging out. Definitely drop any questions you have in the chat. And my plant medicine journey. Okay, yeah. I'll try and do it in the last 60 seconds I have, but my plant medicine journey actually started because I grew up on the remote Oregon coast here, where in a county that has more cows than people. And it taught me two really important things, which is that, you know, quality, reliable healthcare access needs to be available to everyone, and that mushrooms grow really well in cow country. And my father dealt with a really intense cancer. He had Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was stage 4. He was not expected to survive. And he started using cannabis to medicate himself and to deal with the pain and the nausea. And so I grew up getting the DARE messaging at school, but going home and getting a sort of different message. And I knew a lot of people who sort of saw psilocybin as like God's gift to them, and they could just go out into their pastures and medicate themselves essentially. So I sort of grew up with plant medicine in kind of a different realm than my cohorts who were getting the egg frying pan message from the DARE people. And so it really taught me the value of plant medicine and how powerful it is. And even though I grew up around a cancer patient who was medicating with cannabis, I definitely also got talks from my parents, who were both paramedics, about how and when to reliably use it. So I actually didn't start partaking until I was, I mean, in my 20s. Even though I knew that that it was there and that it was available. Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, I have to say that I'm not good enough at foraging to really know enough about mushrooms. I've never gone out myself, but I definitely grew up in a community that knew of it and used it, and so it was interesting, but it definitely kept my mind open. My background is not actually in drug policy; it's in reproductive health care advocacy. And the last campaign I worked on was No on 106, where I helped to raise $3.3 million in a matter of weeks to defeat an anti-abortion ballot measure, which would have affected anyone on the Oregon Health Plan. And so that's initially why I was plucked out of, the universe by this campaign, was for my fundraising experience. But my role changed a lot throughout this campaign because of the pandemic and just how the campaign shifted and changed and had to adapt. My role changed a lot. I was initially hired to do events, and in my previous life, I was also an events and banquets coordinator. So I was supposed to be doing fundraising parties, but clearly through COVID, you can't do that. So we just rolled with the punches and did what we could. And eventually I was in charge of helping us build this great diverse coalition of advocates. But my core belief has always been that, good healthcare needs to be accessible, and it needs to be accessible to everyone. The county I grew up in didn't even have an oncologist, and with a parent who was dealing with a aggressive cancer, that leaves quite an impact on you. Every time he had to go get treatment, we had to do a road trip, and it's the worst road trip in the world, I have to say. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. That was a good question. Oh, Regina, I'm so sorry. I hope he's in a county that at least has oh yeah, no, rural spaces. And we can't, yep, coasties. And the coast is often left behind in these more avenues of access to care. It's always been like the tenet of my work in politics. So even though my background isn't in drug policy and it was in reproductive health care advocacy, there's a common thread there, and there's a reason why. It shouldn't be that way. I'm really sorry to hear that, Regina. Well, this is the end of my time slot, so I feel like I should close up here. If there's any last minute thoughts or questions, oh, good, Regina, I'm happy to hear that. I have to say that it's making me a little sad to see all your names, but I can't see any of your faces. I miss all of you greatly, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Running this campaign remotely was not easy, and it was unprecedented, and we had to throw out the rule book and try new things constantly. We rebuilt, broke down, and rebuilt our systems constantly in order to win. But we won, and we won really, really big. And it's honestly only thanks to some of the people here in this room. Oh, thanks, Allison. You were a vital human too. Oh, yeah, you're welcome, Nikia. It was so good to see all of you. I don't know, I hope that I can see you again sometime soon. I honestly miss everyone that helped us on this campaign. Yeah, I love you guys. Take good care and make sure that you're continuing to keep doing that good education work with your friends, because there's a lot of misconceptions that are still happening about what Measure 109 and what Measure 110 becoming law mean. And I just want to make sure that everyone is safe and knows their rights and are taking good care of themselves and are not making decisions based on some of these common misconceptions that can get people in a lot of trouble. It can be a sticky situation. So thank you. I know that you're all the best kind of advocates, and it was really, really lovely to talk to you. And maybe I'll see you in a couple other rooms here in the Tokeativity event. Bye, everyone.